The avoidant is watching you live your life as if they never existed, and it's destroying something in them they didn't know could be destroyed. You're not posting cryptic messages about them. You're not liking their posts to let them know you're still watching. You're not asking mutual friends about them. You're not showing up places you think they'll be. You're just living fully, visibly, completely, as if the months or years you spent with them were erased from your memory the moment you decided you were done. The silence isn't strategy. That's what's making it so devastating. You're not being silent to make them chase you, or to punish them, or to create mystery that draws them back. You're silent because you genuinely moved on, because they're genuinely not occupying your mental space anymore, because you genuinely don't care what they're doing or thinking or feeling about your absence. Out of mind, out of sight. The phrase usually goes the other way, but you've inverted it. You removed them from your sight by blocking them everywhere, and that removal from your sight led to removal from your mind. And the avoidant is stunned because they thought they were unforgettable, thought the impact they had on you was permanent, thought you'd be processing the relationship for years while they moved on unbothered. Instead, you're the one who's moved on completely, while they're the one who can't stop thinking about you. What's ruthless about your silence is that it's giving the avoidant nothing to work with. When someone is angry, the avoidant knows how to handle it. They can wait out the anger, can apologize just enough to calm it, can use the anger as evidence that the other person is too emotional. When someone is sad, the avoidant can feel guilty enough to offer breadcrumbs that provide temporary relief without actual commitment. When someone is still engaging, reaching out, asking questions, trying to understand what happened, the avoidant maintains power because engagement means they still matter. They're still affecting the other person. They're still central to the other person's emotional experience. But your silence is different. It's not angry silence where you're clearly seething but not speaking. It's not sad silence where you're obviously heartbroken but trying to be strong. It's unbothered silence, indifferent silence, the silence of someone who's genuinely moved on to the point where your background noise they're no longer listening to. And the avoidant has no playbook for this kind of silence because every response they know requires the other person to still be emotionally engaged. Your disengagement is total, and total disengagement renders all their usual tactics useless. The out of mind, out of sight is what's stunning them most, because it's proving they were wrong about their importance in your life. The avoidant operates from assumption that anyone who loves them will love them permanently, will carry them forever, will be unable to fully move on because the mark the avoidant leaves is supposedly indelible. They tell themselves stories about all their exes still thinking about them, still comparing new partners to them, still carrying torch years later. These stories are essential to the avoidant's ego. They need to believe they're unforgettable, because if they're forgettable, if people can move on completely, then their strategy of maintaining power through distance is revealed as generating nothing but eventual irrelevance. Your silence is destroying the story. You're not carrying a torch. You're not comparing anyone to them. You're not thinking about them at all. And the proof is in how you show up in the world, not as someone nursing a broken heart, but as someone who's whole, who's engaged with their life, who's clearly moved forward without any visible grief about leaving the avoidant behind. The avoidant is confronting the possibility that they're not that important, not that impactful, not that unforgettable. And for someone whose entire identity is built on being the person everyone else needs more than they need anyone, confronting their own potential irrelevance is existential crisis. Why your silence is more devastating than anything you could say. The avoidant spent the relationship controlling you through silence. Their silence, their withdrawal, their withholding of communication and emotional availability. They used silence as weapon, as punishment, as way to maintain power, by making you always be the one reaching out, always be the one breaking the silence, always be the one doing the work of maintaining connection they wouldn't maintain. Your silence now is role reversal they never anticipated. You're using their own weapon against them, except you're not using it as weapon. You're just done. And the difference between silence as weapon and silence as genuine disinterest is that silence as weapon requires the other person to eventually break the silence, requires maintaining awareness of them enough to know when to end the punishment. But your silence has no endpoint, because it's not punishment, it's permanent state. You're not planning to break the silence eventually, you're not waiting for the right moment to reach out. You're just gone into your life, and your life doesn't include them anymore. Your silence is also more devastating than anger or pain would be, because anger and pain are forms of continued attachment. If you are angry, it would mean you still cared enough to feel betrayed. If you are in pain, it would mean they still had power to hurt you. But silence that comes from genuine indifference, from having processed everything, from having moved on completely, from having relegated them to person I used to know status. That silence says they don't have any power over you anymore. They can't hurt you because you're not available to be hurt. They can't manipulate you because you're not available to be manipulated. They can't affect you at all because you're not paying attention. And for the avoidant who's built their entire relational strategy on affecting others while remaining unaffected themselves, discovering they're now the affected one while you're unaffected is complete inversion of the power dynamic they thought they controlled. The silence is devastating because it's making the avoidant experience exactly what they made you experience. The anxiety of not knowing where you stand with someone, the powerlessness of not being able to get a response, the humiliation of your attempts at contact being met with nothing. Every time the avoidant used to go silent on you, you felt this exact combination of feelings. You'd send messages that went unanswered. You'd try to initiate conversations that went nowhere. You'd be left wondering if they were even thinking about you or if you were completely off their radar. Now the avoidant is living in that uncertainty, except it's worse for them because they're not used to it. You learn to tolerate massive uncertainty in the relationship with them. But they never had to tolerate any. They always knew exactly where they stood with you because you were always pursuing them, always making your feelings clear, always available. Your silence is forcing them into unfamiliar territory of not knowing. And not knowing is creating anxiety in them that's escalating daily because each day of your continued silence is more evidence that you're serious, that you're not coming back, that they've lost access to you permanently. Your silence is more powerful than words because words can be argued with, can be minimized, can be dismissed. If you told them, I'm done with you, I've moved on, I don't think about you anymore, they could tell themselves, you're just saying that you don't mean it, that you're trying to hurt them or get a reaction. But your silence combined with your visible wellness, your social media showing you happy and engaged with your life, your mutual friends reporting you're doing great, your complete absence from any space where they might encounter you. This combination is undeniable evidence. You can't argue with someone's absence. You can't minimize someone's clear thriving without you. You can't dismiss the evidence that accumulates daily that this person genuinely doesn't need you or think about you or want you anymore. The avoidant is confronted with truth they can't rationalize away, and truth delivered through silence and action is more powerful than any truth delivered through words. The specific ways they're trying to break your silence and why all of it is failing. The avoidant is attempting various tactics to get you to break your silence, and each tactic is failing spectacularly because you're not responding to any of them. They're checking your social media obsessively, not just your posts, but who's liking them, who's commenting, whether anyone new appears who might be romantic interest. They're looking for any sign that you're thinking about them, any post that might be subtly about them, any indication that your silence is performance rather than genuine state. But your social media is giving them nothing. You're posting about your life, your activities, your friends, your interests, and none of it references them even obliquely. There are no sad songs with pointed lyrics. There are no quotes about relationships or healing or moving on. You're not performing I'm fine without you, you're actually fine without you. And the actual fineness is visible in how normal your posts are, how engaged you seem, how little energy you're spending on signaling anything to them. They're trying to reach you through mutual friends, asking casual questions about how you're doing, mentioning they've been thinking about reaching out, testing whether these friends will carry messages back to you. But this is failing because you've already had conversations with mutual friends, making clear you're not available for updates about the avoidant, not interested in hearing what they're saying about you, not open to being go-between. The mutual friends who respect your boundaries are shutting down these attempts. And even the friends who might be tempted to play intermediary are reporting back to the avoidant that you seem genuinely unbothered, genuinely moved on, genuinely not asking about them at all. Each report is knife because it confirms what the avoidant fears most, that you're not thinking about them, that your silence is genuine indifference rather than strategic withdrawal. The avoidant might be trying to engineer accidental encounters, showing up places they think you'll be, creating situations where you'd have to see them or interact with them. But this is failing because you've changed your patterns. You're not going to the places you used to go together. You're not in spaces where you'd likely run into them. You've reorganized your life in ways that eliminate overlap. And the reorganization wasn't dramatic or obvious. You just quietly shifted where you spend your time, so that encountering the avoidant is nearly impossible without them doing something obvious like showing up at your home or workplace, which would reveal their desperation in ways their ego can't tolerate. Your silent reorganization of your life to exclude them is teaching them that you're serious, that this isn't temporary anger or hurt, that you've literally structured your existence to not include them anymore. Some avoidants try the grand gesture, the long apology text sent through the one medium you haven't blocked, the letter delivered through a friend, the gift or flowers sent to your home or workplace. But your response to grand gestures is the same as your response to everything else: silence. You don't acknowledge receipt. You don't send back a message saying you got it but you're not interested. You just absorb it into the void of your indifference and continue with your life. The lack of response to grand gestures is particularly devastating because grand gestures are supposed to work. They're supposed to break through walls, supposed to demonstrate sincerity that demands acknowledgement, supposed to create enough emotional impact that you have to respond even if the response is rejection. But you're not responding at all, which means either the grand gesture didn't reach you, unlikely if it was delivered properly, or it reached you and you genuinely don't care enough to respond. Devastating. The avoidant can't know which, and not knowing while suspecting it's the latter is torture specifically designed by your continued silence. What's happening in them that you're not seeing because you're not watching? While you're living your life completely unbothered, the avoidant is experiencing internal crisis that's escalating because your silence is forcing them to confront things about themselves they've avoided confronting their entire life. They're obsessing about you in ways they've never obsessed about anyone. The person who was always the unbothered one, who always had the power through caring less, who always felt superior through their emotional distance, that person is now the one who can't stop thinking about someone, can't stop checking for signs of that person, can't stop trying to get that person's attention. The obsession is humiliating to them because it contradicts their entire identity. They're supposed to be the one others obsess about, not the one doing the obsessing. But your silence has flipped the script entirely. You're the one who's moved on and unbothered, and they're the one who's stuck and obsessed. The avoidant is also experiencing abandonment feelings they usually defend against. The avoidant's core wound is abandonment. They fear being left, being rejected, being deemed not enough. But they manage this wound by always being the person who leaves first, who maintains the power to reject rather than be rejected, who controls the distance so they never have to feel the full impact of being on the receiving end of someone else's distance. Your silence is activating their abandonment wound in ways nothing else has. Because you're not just leaving, you're demonstrating through your continued thriving that you don't need them, that you're better without them. That being abandoned by them, because that's how they framed their behavior, as them creating distance that you should have chased across, has improved your life rather than damaged it. The abandonment wound is flooding them with feelings they have no tools to manage, and the feelings are intensifying because your silence means they can't do anything to relieve the wound. They can't reach out and get reassurance. They can't manipulate you back into pursuing them. They're stuck with the wound fully open and no way to get the validation that would temporarily close it. The silence is also creating identity crisis in the avoidant. Their identity is I'm the person who doesn't need anyone, who's fine alone, who's not affected by relationships. But their current state directly contradicts that identity. They're not fine, they're affected. They do need, specifically they need your attention, your response, your acknowledgement that they still matter to you. The gap between who they believe themselves to be and who they're actually being right now is creating cognitive dissonance they can't resolve. Either they have to admit their identity is false, that they're not actually the unbothered independent person they've claimed to be, or they have to somehow force reality to match their identity by actually becoming unbothered, which would require genuinely moving on from you. But they can't move on, because your silence is too impactful, too consuming, too present in its absence. So they're trapped in the dissonance, unable to admit their identity is false, unable to make reality match the false identity, just stuck in the gap being tortured by the contradiction. The avoidant is also experiencing something they've never experienced before: regret without ability to make amends. They've had regrets in past relationships, but there was always opening to address those regrets. They could reach out, could apologize, could make some gesture that at least let them feel like they tried to repair what they'd broken. But your silence has eliminated that possibility. There's no way for them to make amends, because you're not available for their amends. There's no way to apologize because you won't hear the apology. There's no way to demonstrate they've changed because you're not watching them long enough to see any change. The regret without possibility of redemption is its own form of hell. They're stuck with guilt about how they treated you, with recognition of what they lost, with awareness that they destroyed something good. And there's no action they can take to relieve any of it. Your silence has trapped them with their regret permanently. How your silence is teaching them lessons words never could. Your silence is teaching the avoidant that actions have consequences. Real consequences, permanent consequences, consequences they can't charm or manipulate their way out of. Every relationship before you, the avoidant could treat people poorly and then do minimal repair that would restore access. The consequences of their behavior were temporary. People would get upset, but they'd get over it. People would threaten to leave, but they'd stay. People would express hurt, but they'd forgive. But your silence is consequence they can't escape from. They treated you poorly, and the consequence is they lost you completely. No amount of apologizing, no amount of explaining their trauma, no amount of promising to change is penetrating your silence to create different outcome. The consequence is permanent, and permanence is teaching them that they can't always control outcomes through their usual tactics. Sometimes people leave and don't come back. Sometimes damage is irreparable. Sometimes consequences are lasting. The lesson is being delivered through your sustained absence in ways no verbal explanation ever could. The silence is teaching them about the real cost of their patterns. When you were in the relationship explaining how their behavior hurt you, when you were trying to get them to understand the impact of their emotional unavailability, they could minimize your explanations, could tell themselves you were being too sensitive or too demanding. But your silence is showing them the cost in terms they can't minimize. They lost you. They lost access to everything you provided. They lost the relationship that was working better for them than any relationship they've had. The cost is undeniable because you're gone and you're thriving, which means whatever you lost by leaving them is less than what you gained. And if leaving them resulted in net gain for you, then the cost they're paying by losing you is enormous. The silence is teaching them through experienced loss rather than through explained impact. And experienced loss is the only teacher that penetrates the avoidant's defended state. Your silence is also teaching the avoidant about their own attachment capacity. They believed they were someone who didn't attach deeply, who could take or leave relationships, who was fine alone. But your silence is revealing they attached to you more deeply than they admitted to themselves. If they truly didn't care, your silence wouldn't bother them. They'd be indifferent to your indifference. But they're not indifferent. They're consumed by your silence, unable to stop thinking about it, desperate to break it. The consumption is evidence of attachment they denied having. Your silence is holding up mirror showing them they're not who they thought they were. They're not the independent, unbothered person they performed being. They're someone who attaches and needs and cares. They just do all of it while defended in ways that prevent them from admitting it or acting on it. And seeing themselves accurately for first time is painful but necessary lesson that only your silence could deliver. The silence is teaching them what it feels like to be on the receiving end of the treatment they gave you. Every day of your silence is day they experience what you experienced for months or years. The anxiety of not knowing where you stand with someone. The powerlessness of not being able to get response. The diminishment of your attempts at connection being ignored. The empathy that develops through experiencing what you put others through is often the only empathy avoidants are capable of. They can't empathize abstractly with others' pain, but they can understand their own pain, and when their pain mirrors the pain they caused, they finally understand what they did. Your silence is creating that mirroring. They're feeling what you felt, and feeling it is teaching them what explaining it never could. That what they did was wrong, was hurtful, was not acceptable treatment of someone who cared about them. Why the ruthlessness of your silence is actually self-respect. What the avoidant is interpreting as ruthlessness is actually just boundaries, firm boundaries, clear boundaries, boundaries that don't negotiate even when enforcing them is uncomfortable. You're not being ruthless by staying silent. You're being boundaried. You decided that the relationship didn't work for you, that the avoidance patterns were unacceptable, that continuing contact would prevent you from moving on, and you enforced the boundary that protects those decisions. The enforcement looks ruthless to the avoidant because they're used to your boundaries being soft, being negotiable, being something they could push against until you yielded. But these boundaries are different. These boundaries are final. And boundaries that are final feel ruthless to people who are used to violating boundaries without consequence. But they're not ruthless, they're healthy. They're evidence of self-respect the avoidant never believed you had. The silence is self-respect expressed as refusal to be available for someone who wasn't available for you. The avoidant had access to you for months or years, and they didn't use that access to build partnership. They used it to take from you while giving nothing equivalent. They had your emotional availability, your patience, your understanding, and they met all of it with distance, with inconsistency, with emotional unavailability. Your silence now is withdrawing access that was being misused. You're no longer available for one-sided dynamic where you give and they take. You're no longer available for relationship where your needs don't matter. You're no longer available for someone who demonstrated clearly through their patterns that they can't or won't meet you. The unavailability is self-protection, not punishment. You're protecting yourself from further harm by someone who's proven they'll harm you given the chance. The ruthlessness they perceive is also your refusal to make their feelings your responsibility. In the relationship, you managed their emotions. You regulated yourself to avoid triggering their withdrawal. You suppressed your needs to prevent their discomfort. You did the work of keeping them comfortable even when their comfort came at your expense. That your silence is refusal to continue that emotional labor. The avoidant is uncomfortable with your silence. They want you to break it to relieve their discomfort. But their discomfort is not your responsibility. They created their discomfort through their behavior. They can sit with it. Your silence is teaching them that you're not responsible for managing their feelings, not responsible for making them feel better about how they treated you, not responsible for easing their regret by giving them opportunity to apologize. Their feelings are theirs to manage. Your silence is boundary that keeps their feelings from becoming your problem to solve. The silence is self-respect because it's you choosing your own peace over their desire for access. Staying in contact with the avoidant would be disruptive to your peace. It would keep you hoping they'd change, keep you wondering if you should give another chance, keep you emotionally tied to someone who proved they can't be a good partner to you. Your silence is prioritizing your peace over their wants. They want to talk to you, want to explain themselves, want to apologize or stay in touch or maintain some thread of connection. But what they want is less important than what you need. And what you need is complete separation that allows you to move forward without looking back. The ruthlessness is just you finally understanding that your needs matter more than their wants. And that understanding is self-respect that should have been there all along, but is finally present now. The permanent shift your silence is creating in the dynamic. Your silence has permanently shifted who has the power in the dynamic. In the relationship, they had power through their withholding. They could withdraw and you'd pursue. They could go silent and you'd break the silence. They controlled the intimacy through controlling the distance. But your silence has inverted all of that. You're withholding now. You're the one who's withdrawn. You're the one who's silent. And they're the one who's powerless, who's trying to get response, who's attempting to close distance you've created. The power shift is complete and irreversible. Even if they somehow got you to break your silence, even if they managed to restore some contact, they'd forever know that you're the one who could walk away completely and be fine. That you're the one who could cut them off without looking back. That you're the one who has the strength to live without them while they're demonstrably struggling to live without you. The knowledge of who actually has the strength in the dynamic can't be unknown once it's known. The silence has also permanently changed how they see you. You're no longer the accommodating person they thought you were, the patient person who would tolerate anything, the understanding person who would make endless excuses for their behavior. You're someone who has limits they didn't see, who has strength they didn't recognize, who has capacity to completely cut off someone you cared about when that person proves they're not good for you. The revised perception of you is mixing respect with fear, respect for your boundaries and strength, fear of your capacity to remove them so thoroughly from your life. They're seeing you as more formidable than they ever recognized while you were with them. And the revised perception means they'll never be able to see you as weak or easily controlled again. Even if contact was somehow restored, they'd be dealing with a different person than the one they took for granted. Your silence has permanently taught them that you're not waiting. In past relationships, the avoidant could take breaks, could create distance, could pull away knowing the other person would be there when they decided to return. But your silence is communicating clearly that you're not in waiting mode, not putting your life on hold, not staying available in case they want to try again. You're moving forward without them, building life that doesn't include them, becoming a version of yourself that exists independently of anything to do with them. The moving forward visibly is teaching them that they don't get to come back when they're ready, because you're not waiting for them to be ready. Your timeline moved on without them, and watching your timeline progress while they're stuck is a permanent lesson about what it costs to take people for granted, to assume they'll always be available, to treat someone's patience as infinite resource rather than limited gift that eventually runs out. The silence is also creating permanent change in them, regardless of whether they grow from it or harden from it. Some avoidants will take your silence and use it as a wake-up call that finally drives them to therapy, to actually doing the work to change their patterns, to becoming capable of the intimacy they couldn't access with you. For these rare avoidants, your silence is catalyst that saves them from lifetime of repeated losses and increasing isolation. But most avoidants will take your silence and use it as confirmation of their defended worldview, that people leave eventually, that vulnerability leads to pain, that they were right to be defended all along. These avoidants will harden further, will become more defended in future relationships, will use your leaving as evidence that closeness should be avoided. Either way, your silence is creating permanent change, either toward growth or toward further defensiveness. And understanding that your silence is changing them permanently, even though you're not there to see the change, is its own form of power. You had impact on them that will last long after your silence becomes complete lack of contact. After you've moved on so thoroughly that they're truly out of your mind as completely as they're out of your sight. What you're learning about yourself through maintaining the silence. Maintaining silence in the face of the avoidance attempts to break it is teaching you about your own strength. Every day you maintain the boundary is day you're proving to yourself that you can resist the urge to respond, that you can sit with the discomfort of not knowing how they're doing, that you can prioritize your long-term well-being over your short-term curiosity or compassion. The strength you're discovering isn't about being hard or cold. It's about being committed to your own growth and peace, enough to protect those things even when protecting them requires ongoing choice not to engage. Each day of maintained silence is building your confidence in your ability to enforce boundaries, to make hard choices, to choose yourself even when it's uncomfortable. The confidence is permanent upgrade to your capacity that will serve you in every future relationship and situation where boundaries need to be maintained. You're also learning that you can survive not knowing. The avoidance attempts to reach you, they're trying through mutual friends, their potential suffering or regret. You don't know the details of any of it because you're not asking, not checking, not staying informed. And not knowing is initially uncomfortable, but you're learning you can tolerate the discomfort, that you don't need to know everything, that not knowing is actually healthier than staying informed about someone you're trying to move on from. The capacity to tolerate not knowing, to release the need to monitor or track or stay updated, is freedom from the obsessive thinking that keeps people tied to relationships that are over. You're learning you can close a chapter completely without knowing how the other character in that chapter is doing, and that closing without knowing is how you actually move forward, rather than staying stuck processing someone who's no longer part of your life. The maintained silence is teaching you the difference between your empathy and codependency. In the relationship, you thought your understanding of the avoidance wounds was empathy, thought your patience with their limitations was compassion. But maintaining silence is showing you that what you were calling empathy was often codependency, making their issues your responsibility, managing their emotions for them, sacrificing your needs to accommodate their dysfunction. Real empathy can exist alongside firm boundaries. Real compassion doesn't require self-abandonment. You're learning that you can understand someone's pain while refusing to be hurt by that pain, can recognize someone's wounds while refusing to be wounded by them, can have empathy for someone's struggles while maintaining complete distance from them. The distinction between empathy with boundaries and codependent caretaking is clarity that protects your future self from repeating the pattern of losing yourself in trying to save someone else. You're learning through the silence that your worth isn't determined by whether the avoidant recognizes it. While you were with them, while you were trying to make the relationship work, part of you was hoping that if you were just patient enough, understanding enough, good enough, they'd finally see your value and choose you fully. But maintaining silence, regardless of whether they're recognizing what they lost, is teaching you that your value is inherent, exists independent of anyone else's recognition, doesn't need to be validated by someone who proved they can't value you properly. The worth you're discovering in yourself, worth that exists whether the avoidant sees it or not, worth that's proven by your capacity to choose yourself, worth that's demonstrated by your strength, to maintain boundaries even when it's hard. This is worth that can't be taken from you because it's not dependent on external validation. And discovering worth that's internally sourced rather than externally validated is transformation that changes everything about how you show up in future relationships. The final truth about ruthless silence as response to avoidant behavior. The final truth is that your ruthless silence is appropriate response, not vindictive, not excessive, not unfair, just appropriate. The avoidant treated you poorly enough and consistently enough that complete separation became necessary for your well-being. The silence isn't punishment you're inflicting. It's boundary you're enforcing, and boundaries that protect you from people who've proven they'll hurt you are never ruthless. They're essential. The avoidant experiencing your boundaries as ruthless is evidence of their entitlement, Evidence that they expected continued access to you despite giving you nothing worthy of that access. Evidence that they thought they could treat you however they wanted and you'd always be available. Your silence is teaching them that their expectations were wrong, that access to you is privilege they lost through their behavior, that you're not obligated to remain available to someone who demonstrated clearly they don't value your availability. The final truth is also that your silence is likely permanent, regardless of what the avoidant does from here. If they go to therapy, if they do the work, if they become capable of healthy relationship, those changes will benefit their future, not your present. Your silence isn't waiting for them to change so you can try again. Your silence is final statement that what you had is over, that you've moved on, that you're building life that doesn't include them, regardless of what they do or don't do to address their patterns. The permanence of your silence is mercy to yourself. It prevents you from being pulled back into hoping or wondering or giving another chance to someone who's already proven they can't meet you. And the permanence is also lesson to them that some consequences can't be undone, that some doors close and don't reopen, that taking people for granted can cost you those people permanently. Your ruthless silence is you finally understanding that you deserve better than what the avoidant offered, that your time and energy are too valuable to spend on someone who won't reciprocate, that your peace matters more than someone else's comfort with accessing you. The ruthlessness they perceive is actually just health. You're healthy enough to recognize dysfunction and remove yourself from it, healthy enough to enforce boundaries that protect you, healthy enough to choose yourself over someone who proved they wouldn't choose you. The silence is the sound of you choosing yourself. And that choice, however ruthless it looks to the avoidant who's on the receiving end of it, is the most loving thing you've ever done for yourself. The avoidant is stunned because they never expected you to have this in you, but you did. You always had the strength to leave completely, to maintain boundaries firmly, to build life without them. You just needed the right motivation to access that strength, and they provided the motivation perfectly through treating you poorly enough and consistently enough that staying became more painful than the pain of leaving. Your silence is their final lesson, that treating people as if they're disposable eventually results in them disposing of you. Out of mind, out of sight. And the avoidant is learning too late that out of your mind and out of your sight means out of your life, permanently. Because once someone like you decides they're done completely. And the completeness of your being done is the ruthlessness they're experiencing. The ruthlessness that's actually just you finally, definitively, permanently choosing yourself.